A corrupt cop thought he'd found an easy target on a quiet suburban street. He was dead wrong. He just picked a fight with the best friend of man you should never, ever cross. The sun was a merciless hammer over Oak Creek, California. It beat down on the manicured lawns and immaculate sidewalks, bleaching the color from the sky and making the air thick enough to drink. It was the kind of heat that drove people indoors into the cool, conditioned air of their suburban sanctuaries. The silence of midday was broken only by the distant hum of a lawnmower and the drone of cicadas vibrating in the oak trees. Dr. Eris Thorne felt the heat radiating up from the asphalt through the soles of her designer heels. She carried a sleek, leather-bound portfolio under one arm, the plans for her latest architectural project tucked safely inside. Dressed in a beige linen pantsuit, she was the picture of professional elegance, even as tiny beads of perspiration gathered at her temples. Her street was just ahead, a familiar, comforting sight after a grueling morning of meetings. This quiet, tree-lined lane was her refuge, a place where the chaos of the city felt a million miles away. But the peace of the afternoon was about to be shattered. Leaning against his gleaming black and white patrol car, parked deliberately to obstruct half the sidewalk, was Officer Kade Mulligan. He wore a pair of reflective aviator sunglasses that concealed his eyes, but everything else about him screamed arrogance. His jaw worked a piece of gum with aggressive chomps, and a smirk was permanently etched on his face, framed by a poorly trimmed mustache. Mulligan had a reputation in the community, a quiet one whispered among residents. He was a bully with a badge, a man who got his thrills from flexing power on those he deemed beneath him. As Eris approached, his head tilted, tracking her like a predator. He pushed himself off the car, planting his polished boots squarely in her path. "Afternoon, ma'am," he drawled, his voice a lazy, condescending rumble. "Bit of a hurry?" Eris stopped, a polite but firm expression on her face. "Excuse me, officer. I'm just trying to get home." Mulligan's smirk widened. He made a show of looking her up and down, his gaze lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "This is a nice neighborhood. Expensive. You sure you live around here?" A flash of indignation sparked in Eris's eyes. "Yes, I'm quite sure. My house is 2 down from here. Now, if you'll please step aside." "Not so fast," he said, holding up a hand. He gestured toward her portfolio with his chin. "What's in a folder?" "Company secrets. They're architectural drawings," she replied, her voice cooling by several degrees. "And they are none of your business. You are obstructing my path without cause." The challenge in her tone seemed to delight him. This was the friction he craved. "Without cause? Ma'am, I'm a police officer conducting routine neighborhood observation. Your attitude seems a little suspicious. Maybe I should have a look in that folder. And your purse, too." Eris's patience, already worn thin by the oppressive heat, finally snapped. "You will do no such thing. You have no probable cause to search my belongings. This is harassment." "Harassment?" Mulligan let out a short, ugly laugh. "That's a big word. Let me teach you a bigger one. Authority." Before she could react, his hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her arm like a vice. The sudden, rough contact sent a jolt of shock and fear through her. "Let go of me," she gasped, trying to pull away. But his grip was like iron. The world seemed to lurch and tilt. In one violent motion, Officer Mulligan twisted Eris's arm behind her back and slammed her forward. The air rushed from her lungs as her body collided with the scorching hood of the patrol car. The metal seared through the thin linen of her jacket, a blistering shock of pain. Her portfolio flew from her grasp, hitting the pavement with a sickening thud and bursting open. Architectural drawings, the product of weeks of meticulous work, scattered across the sidewalk like fallen leaves, their crisp white surfaces instantly smudged by the dusty ground. "Stop resisting," Mulligan barked, the words a cruel parody of police procedure. He pressed his forearm into the small of her back, grinding her against the hot metal. "I'm not resisting," Eris cried out, her voice tight with pain and outrage. "You're hurting me. I haven't done anything." Her plea was fuel to his fire. His face was now close to hers, his breath hot and sour against her ear. smelling of stale coffee and mint gum. "You've got a mouth on you, don't you? Think because you dress fancy you can talk back to me? Let's see how tough you are now." The first blow was a vicious, open-handed slap to the back of her head, forcing her cheek hard against the blistering hood. Stars exploded behind her eyelids. Before she could recover, he drove his knee in her thigh, a sharp, agonizing impact that made her leg buckle. She whimpered, a sound of pure, helpless pain. "That's it," he sneered, his voice a low, triumphant growl. "Make some noise for me." He yanked her upright by her hair, just enough for her to catch a desperate breath, before shoving her down again. His fist began to work on her side, short, brutal jabs to her ribs. 1, 2, 3 punches landed with sickening thuds. She felt a sharp, cracking sensation and gasped, the world narrowing to a tunnel of blinding pain. Her strength was gone. Her knees gave way, and she started to slide toward the pavement. The street remained eerily silent. No curtains twitched. No doors opened. It was as if the entire neighborhood had collectively held its breath, too afraid to intervene. She was utterly alone, at the mercy of a man whose cruelty seemed to have no bounds. The sun beat down indifferent. The cicadas buzzed, their song a maddening soundtrack to her nightmare. Despair began to wash over her, cold and heavy despite the heat. But then, through the shimmering waves of heat rising from the asphalt, through the blur of tears and pain, she saw it. A figure, half a block away, walking toward them. The walk was unhurried, almost casual, yet it carried an unmistakable weight, a sense of absolute purpose that cut through the haze of her agony. He was a man in his 60s, with his signature dark hair tied back in a ponytail and a neatly trimmed, graying goatee. He wore a simple black Henley shirt and dark work pants. In his right hand, he carried something that glinted in the sunlight. Recognition pierced through her fog of pain, and a single, desperate word formed on her lips, a whispered prayer. Steven Seagal had been at the hardware store. The plumbing under his kitchen sink had sprung a leak, a mundane problem for a man who had faced down armies on screen. He bought a replacement pipe and a heavy-duty steel wrench, the kind made of solid, unforgiving iron. The wrench felt solid and balanced in his hand as he walked the final stretch home. The familiar calm of his neighborhood was a welcome antidote to the crowded aisles of the store. And then he saw it. The scene materialized at the end of the block, a grotesque tableau under the noon sun. A patrol car, a woman pinned against its hood, and a uniformed officer striking her. For a moment, his brain struggled to process the image. Then, a cold, sharp clarity washed over him. He recognized the elegant line of the pantsuit, the fall of the dark hair. It was Eris, his best friend, his confidant for over 20 years. Something ancient and glacial shifted deep within him. The world didn't narrow, it sharpened. Every detail became hyper-focused. The way Mulligan gripped her hair, the smug, vicious curl of his lip, the way Eris's body shuddered with each blow. The heavy steel wrench in his hand suddenly felt less like a tool and more like an extension of his will. He didn't run. He didn't shout. His pace remained the same, a deliberate, rhythmic stride that ate up the pavement. Each footfall was a silent promise. Each breath was a measured intake of cold fury. Mulligan, lost in his sadistic power trip, heard Eris whisper the name, but didn't immediately register it. Annoyed by the distraction, he turned his head. "What did you say?" And that's when he saw him. The man wasn't large in the way a bodybuilder was, but he possessed a density, a presence that seemed to warp the air around him. The sun glinted off the steel wrench, but it was the eyes that made Mulligan's blood run cold. They were flat, black, and utterly devoid of emotion. They were the eyes of a predator that had just found its prey. "Get your hands off her!" Steven's voice was low, almost conversational, yet carried across the silent street with the chilling finality of a death sentence. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Mulligan's face. He recognized the man from movies, but the reality was infinitely more intimidating. He tried to recover, falling back on his usual bluster. He gave a short, nervous laugh. Well, look what we have here. The movie star. What's the matter, old man? Friend of yours getting a little out of line?" To maintain his sense of dominance, he gave Eris another rough shove. It was a fatal mistake. Steven took another step forward. The wrench swung gently at his side, a pendulum counting down the final seconds of Mulligan's authority. You have 5 seconds to let her go and walk away. Mulligan's arrogance overrode his fear. Or what? You gonna hit me with that toy? He tightened his grip on Eris, trying to use her as a shield. I'm an officer of the law. You touch me, and you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell. You are not an officer, Steven said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a gravelly growl. You're a coward in a costume, and your time is up. The air crackled with tension. Curtains were definitely twitching now. A neighbor down the street slowly opened their door, their phone already in their hand. Mulligan finally recognized the abyss he had stepped into. He let go of Eris, pushing her violently to the side. She stumbled, catching herself on a nearby mailbox, her body screaming in protest. Steven didn't even flinch. His eyes never left Mulligan. With a movement so smooth, it was almost imperceptible. He stepped between them, shielding Eris with his body. His left hand reached back, a brief, reassuring touch on her arm, before his full attention snapped back to the thug in front of him. The wrench glinted. You think that badge protects you? Steven asked. It won't protect you from me. Officer Mulligan's bravado was a cracked dam, and fear was flooding through. He fumbled at his belt, his hand closing around the familiar weight of his steel baton. He yanked it free, the metal shaft extending with a menacing shing. Stay back. I'm warning you, he yelled, his voice an octave higher than usual. He swung the baton in a wild, desperate arc, aiming for Steven's head. To an onlooker, the swing was fast and vicious. To Steven, it was happening in slow motion. He didn't retreat. He didn't even seem to move much at all. He simply turned his shoulders slightly, a subtle shift of weight. The baton sliced through the empty air where his head had been a fraction of a second before. Before Mulligan could process the miss, Steven flowed forward. The steel wrench came up, not in a clumsy swing, but in a precise, calculated block. Mulligan, overcommit, tried to bring his baton back for another strike, but it was too late. There was a deafening clang of steel striking steel that echoed down the silent street. The impact was bone-jarring. The vibration shot up the baton and into Mulligan's arm like a massive electric shock. He howled in pain, his fingers going numb, his grip failing. The baton clattered onto the hot asphalt. Mulligan stared at his empty, tingling hand in disbelief. Before he could even think to reach for his sidearm, Steven moved again. One hand shot out and seized the front of Mulligan's uniform, twisting the fabric and pulling him off balance. With his other hand, Steven casually bent down, picked up the fallen baton, and straightened up, all in one fluid, unbroken motion. He held the baton in front of Mulligan's face. "This is your power?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "This piece of metal?" Mulligan could only stammer, his eyes wide with terror. Steven held the baton in one hand and the heavy wrench in the other. He placed the center of the baton against the head of the wrench. Then, with a grunt of focused effort, he applied pressure. There was a groan of protesting metal, and the solid steel baton began to bend. He continued to apply pressure until it was bent into a perfect, useless U-shape. He then tossed it onto the ground at Mulligan's feet, where it landed with a dull, pathetic clatter. A collective gasp went through the small crowd that had now gathered at a safe distance. Phones were out recording. The video of a Hollywood action star disarming a cop and bending his steel baton with a wrench would be uploaded before the sirens ever arrived. Mulligan's face was a mask of rage and utter humiliation. You can't do that," he sputtered. Steven's grip on his uniform tightened, pulling him so close their faces were inches apart. "I just did," he growled. The lesson isn't over. He spun Mulligan around and slammed him against the side of the patrol car with tremendous force. The officer's head hit the window frame with a sickening crack, and he slumped, dazed. Steven wasn't finished. He wrenched him upright again, his movements precise and brutal, a masterclass in controlled violence. He twisted Mulligan's arm up behind his back in a devastating joint lock. The officer screamed, a high-pitched sound of agony that was a stark contrast to his earlier machismo. "You like to hurt people who can't fight back?" Steven spat, applying more pressure. "Let's see how you like it when someone can." He forced the now sobbing officer to his knees on the scorching asphalt, the man's authority, his pride, and his weapon all lying broken at his feet. The lesson in physical dominance was complete. Now the lesson in humility would begin. Steven hauled the whimpering, defeated officer back to his feet. Mulligan's legs were like jelly. He could barely stand. Steven propelled him forward, forcing him back to the front of the patrol car. With a final contemptuous shove, he slammed Mulligan face down onto the same scorching hood where Eris had been moments before. "This feel familiar?" Steven's voice was a venomous whisper right next to Mulligan's ear. The metal was an inferno. Mulligan cried out, trying to push himself up, but Steven's weight was an immovable anchor, pressing him down, grinding his cheek into the searing paint. "This is what you did to her. This is the pain she felt. The fear. I want you to feel it. I want you to remember it every time you close your eyes for the rest of your life." Mulligan thrashed, his pathetic struggles only serving to scrape his face raw against the hot surface. Sweat and tears mingled with the dust on the car's hood. The crowd of neighbors watched, no longer in silent shock, but with a growing murmur of approval. They had all lived in low-grade fear of this man, of his petty tyrannies and his unpredictable temper. Now, they were witnessing his complete and utter dismantling. Eris, clutching her bruised ribs, took a step forward. Her voice was hoarse. "Steven, that's enough. Don't become him." Her words cut through his cold rage. He heard her. He looked from her pained face to the pathetic creature squirming beneath him. He eased the pressure slightly. "He'll live," he said, his voice still hard as granite, but meant to reassure her. "But he will never forget this day." He yanked Mulligan up by the collar, spinning him around to face the jury of his neighbors, to face the dozens of phone cameras now broadcasting his downfall to the world. Mulligan's face was a mess of crimson humiliation, streaked with dirt and tears. "Apologize," Steven commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Mulligan's chest heaved with ragged breaths. He glared at Eris with eyes full of pathetic, impotent hatred. "Never," he choked out. The steel wrench, which had been hanging from Steven's belt, was suddenly back in his hand. He didn't raise it in a threatening way. He simply held it. The sunlight caught its polished steel head, and in that moment, it looked like a judge's gavel. "Apologize," Steven repeated, his tone unchanged. But this time, the word was backed by the undeniable promise of more pain, more humiliation, more breaking points that Mulligan didn't even know he had. The officer's defiance crumbled like sun-baked earth. His eyes darted from the wrench to Steven's cold, unforgiving face, and he broke. His lips trembled. A pathetic, strangled sob escaped him. I'm sorry," he mumbled, the words barely audible. "I don't think they heard you," Steven said, gesturing with his head toward the crowd. "Louder." The final shred of Mulligan's pride was stripped away. He squeezed his eyes shut, a tear of pure shame tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. He screamed the words, his voice cracking, echoing through the unnaturally quiet street. I'm sorry. A smattering of applause broke out from the neighbors, quickly growing into a wave of cheers and cathartic shouts. The reign of Officer Kade Mulligan was officially over. Steven stared down at the broken man for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he turned his attention to the patrol car, the symbol of Mulligan's corrupted authority. He raised the heavy steel wrench high. With a single, powerful, and deafeningly loud strike, he brought it down on the center of the hood. Crunch! The metal imploded, leaving a deep, crater-like dent in the once pristine surface. The sound was like a gunshot, making everyone, including Mulligan, flinch. It was a final, indelible mark. A scar. A signature. "Every time you see that," Steven said quietly, his voice now only for Mulligan, "you will remember what happens when you mistake cruelty for strength." He let the wrench fall from his hand, its job done. It clattered onto the pavement, the final sound in the brutal symphony. He then turned his back on the disgraced officer, all the cold fury draining away from him, replaced by a deep, gentle concern. He walked over to Eris, his movements now slow and tender. He gently took her arm, his hands inspecting the bruises already forming. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." She leaned into him, her body trembling with the release of adrenaline and pain. She rested her head against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I knew you would come," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Always," he replied, placing a light kiss on her forehead. Together, they turned and walked down the street toward her home. The crowd of neighbors parted for them like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of awe, respect, and gratitude. Behind them, Kade Mulligan remained crumpled on the asphalt, a pathetic figure in a dirty uniform, surrounded by the evidence of his ruin. A bent baton, a dented car, and a street full of witnesses with fully charged smartphones. Within the hour, the videos hit the internet. They went viral before the official police report was even filed. The story exploded, a tale of a corrupt cop's brutality and the unexpected, decisive justice delivered by a Hollywood legend. It sparked a firestorm of debate online and in the news about police misconduct and accountability. Kade Mulligan wasn't just fired. He became a national symbol of abuse of power. What do you think of Steven's actions? Was this justice or was it vengeance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We ask that you please be respectful of everyone involved. And if you believe no one should be above the law, share this video and subscribe for more true stories.